Okay, I'm gonna check out this video. I just played it for about 30 seconds, and it's not very long. It's just a 6-minute video here. Most recent video from Darth Dawkins debunked website. So we'll see what we can get out of this.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope all of you are doing very well. This video is a response to a comment that was left on my channel under my video entitled "See Below and Then Ask." What do you think about Darth's only true worldview? It was left by a YouTuber with the screen name at Milena Huffman, and I read her comment and then put together this video reply. The following is the comment she made. Cute. Gary doesn't know what he is talking about. As usual, I wrote extensively on worldviews over the past year. Check my Substack. And March, early April, the book is out. Not sure it's listed at the moment as I am in review. Give it another week or so. The vast majority of people is unaware of having a worldview and are unable to clearly express it. The idea that they're
So right away, the vast majority of people are unaware of having a worldview, a perspective, a philosophy about life. Is that what she's saying? I guess he's critiquing or he's reading a letter from this woman here. So is that what she just said?
Early April, the book is out. Not sure it's listed at the moment as I am in review. Give it another week or so. The vast majority of people is unaware of having a worldview and are unable to clearly express it.
Okay, so I don't know what that's supposed to give us. Everyone has a worldview, a view of the world. They're in the world. They have a perspective, and they talk about life, themselves, whatever it may be. They're coming from a unique perspective, that being them. So, I mean, I might agree that people are not able to clearly express it, but to say that people don't know they have it, well, it just takes a minute or two of conversation to explain what that means. You have a worldview, you're in the world, you're a living, breathing being with a perspective, opinions, an understanding of how the world works to one degree or another.
Idea that there can only be one valid and true worldview is pure nonsense. Apart from that, every worldview is intrinsically incomplete, incoherent, and inconsistent, unquote. I am going to respond to this one with basically two parts. First, how it directly relates to Van Til's framework, and secondly, how it relates to Gary himself. So, starting with Van Til, within Cornelius Van Til's presuppositional apologetic framework, objective proof is inherently tied to the covenantal status of the individual making a knowledge claim. Van Til asserts that knowledge and justification are not religiously neutral or abstract, but require submission to the triune God revealed in Scripture. Thus, when an individual states, I know that according to the Bible, the biblical God was not either sovereign or creator, sans creation, the evaluation of that claim depends fundamentally on whether the speaker is reasoning from Christian presuppositions. According to Van Til, without knowing whether the individual is a believer or an unbeliever, one cannot determine if their claim is objectively proven or justified. This is because in Van Til's system, unbelievers suppress the truth and interpret reality through autonomous presuppositions.
Okay, so she's going through a little rundown of Van Til here. That would be a reference to Romans 1:18, suppressing the truth and unrighteousness.
That invalidate their epistemic authority, while believers ground truth claims in God's revelation. Consequently, the objective epistemic status of such statements is indeterminate, absent knowledge of the speaker's presuppositional stance. As I have mentioned in previous videos, this inseparability of justification from covenantal allegiance exposes a critical epistemological vulnerability. Van Til's apologetic framework effectively requires prior knowledge of the speaker's faith status to validate any claim as objectively proven. This dependency renders the system epistemologically circular and arguably absurd, as it disallows independent verification of truth claims.
Well, when you're talking about a worldview, the circularity of a worldview, the thing that I think this response is missing or unaware of is that all worldviews are going to be circular. They're going to come back to the source. Van Til's coming from what's called a theonomous worldview. It starts with God. It all starts with God. The recognition, acknowledgement of God, the presupposing of God. And then those who have a worldview from what they would call autonomous reasoning or a different source, it's going to come back to that ultimately. So in that sense, all worldviews are circular.
Without presupposing the very Christian worldview it aims to establish. To illustrate this absurdity, we can use the following statement, and the statement has actually come up in at least 3 of Gary's chats with atheists. Gary will ask, can you make any statement in such a way that you cannot be wrong about it? The atheist replies by saying, yes, I know that I am not your biblical God. In one case, Gary actually replied with, how do you know that? Even in the case of a statement such as,
yeah, that's a good, that's a good statement, a good test statement. I've asked people that because the autonomous reasoner typically has an epistemology that says, I can't be certain of anything. So you ask them questions like, well, are you not certain if you're the biblical God or not? Right? It seems like obviously an absurd question that someone would say, well, I'm not sure. But it's meant to point out that their epistemology is claiming that they're not sure. So you can basically ask them anything. Like I was asking somebody who was coming at it with the epistemology of I don't know. When I say I don't know, it's in the ultimate sense. They can't know anything. So I was asking, well, were you birthed by your mother tomorrow? Were you birthed by your mother tomorrow and last Thursday physically? It just, similar to asking them if they're the God of the Bible, like things that they live out, that they live with a sense of certainty. Like, well, yeah, of course I wasn't birthed out of my mother next week physically. But then when they get into their philosophy, their worldview, they say, well, I don't know. Maybe I could be. I could be a brain in a vat. I could be birthed out of my mother physically next week. You're trying to point out the absurdity of the autonomous epistemology in this sense.
As I know that I am not your biblical God, that statement, when spoken by an individual whose position as either a believer or an unbeliever is unknown, then under Van Til's system, even Van Til himself could not determine and also could not launch any type of a critique against such a statement. Van Til's apologetics hinges on the idea that only believers can truly justify knowledge claims. But
Van Til would say that he can justify an account for the statement that the person he's talking to is not the biblical God. He presupposes the biblical God, who is the creator of all humanity. There's a creator-creature distinction. Humans would not be that God. So he would say, I am presupposing the Christian God, the biblical God, and I know that you, the creature, or I, the creature, or any of God's creatures, which are part of his creation, are not God himself. That's how he would argue that. Again, he's pointing out that with the epistemology, the autonomous reasoning of the unbeliever, they can't account for any sort of certainty. So you can throw out the most absurd thing to them, and they're going to say, well, I can't be certain that I'm not the God of the Bible, but I don't think I am. I don't live like I am. They leave the possibility there, and that's why you use such examples. You go to the extreme examples in philosophy to test the validity, the rationality of your interlocutor's position.
If the system can't adjudicate or verify a speaker's status, such as myself, such a position, as far as I am concerned, reduces Van Til's apologetics to a level of complete and total worthless absurdity. Now, in the case of our mutual friend, let's examine one of the statements he made, the one that currently highlights my YouTube banner. On one of the modern day debates, the one that featured Darth Dawkins versus Florida Man, Gary was asked, quote, "What did your God do during the infinity before it created everything?" Gary responded by saying, again, quote, "What did my God do sans creation?" I couldn't answer that question. It hasn't been revealed. Assuming Van Til's presuppositional framework is correct, and assuming that one is a Van Tillian, would this statement make sense under the auspices of its own framework? The answer is an explicit no. This statement would not make sense within Van Til's system, and it would actually be an internal contradiction of Van Til's foundational theological commitments. How so? Van Til taught that God is eternally sovereign and that God is creator by nature. Neither of these are acquired or accidental properties under Van Til's system. The statement is, under Gary's own TOS, denying that God was sovereign or creator in any meaningful sense before creation existed. The statement, "I couldn't answer," that equates to an "I don't know." And under Gary's own decrees, that equals unintelligibility.
No, I don't know why they think asking questions about God before his creation, or a question that the creature, which is a part of his creation, can't know, is a problem. Like, God's knowledge transcends the creature. We think after the mind of God, but we never have full knowledge of the complete mind of God. He's transcendent. So if you ask a question that's outside of the biblical teaching or the person's understanding, for them to say, I don't know how to answer that particular question, isn't a problem. But again, when you're talking to somebody who's asking you these questions, and they bring in some sort of doubt or some sort of difficult question, you want to challenge their epistemology, because they're bringing in ideas that they need to account for, right? When they're talking about God or things of transcendent nature, you want to question their epistemology, how they have knowledge to formulate and even bring forth such a question and to reason to this. So I don't see this as a problem to answer that specific question. I don't know. I mean, I can go back and re-listen to the question, but anyway, that's fine. I'll just keep going. This is actually, I didn't watch this prior. There's some very heavy language here. It might be worth watching again.
Gary's statement directly contradicts classical Christian theology, Van Til's doctrine of God, and the Bible itself by smuggling in ideas that have no biblical grounding. And according to wonderful, polite Gary himself, if it isn't in the Bible, it's speculative. Now, not that I expect it could ever possibly happen, but Mr. Polite Man Gary or any of his agents or stooges can attempt to produce a Bible verse that supports either concept, but any attempt to do so will only be digging the grave much deeper than it already is, as neither idea or concept can be found anywhere from Genesis 1:1 to the end of the.
So I think they're pointing out here that some of these philosophies, Van Til's philosophy, while it says it relies on the Bible, it seems to go outside of the spectrum of the Bible itself. Some of these philosophical ideas, and I would agree with that. I think what would the move here would be to point out that we have ability to know God and the ability to reason, and it would go into Romans 1 again, that the creation has been made apparent to us. The truth of God has been made known to us. We either acknowledge it or suppress it. So to use some of this philosophical language can be challenged, of course. Like, how do you know that if you're coming from the Bible, if you're presupposing God? I understand that. But to negate it, again, when you're working with an interlocutor, you're always challenging their worldview. And I think that's the process that's being avoided here is whoever the interlocutor is, you need to speak to them worldview to worldview. If they want to try to bring in other worldviews or other philosophies to try to challenge you, that's where they're going to try to give themselves a grant that you wouldn't allow them to. You say, no, I need to talk to you about your worldview, and I'm going to talk about my worldview, and we're going to go back and forth in a conversation, in a discussion or debate. And if you have any questions or doubts, that you want to bring it to the table, that's fine. And accordingly, I'm going to challenge your epistemology. And also, this doesn't get brought up enough, your ethics. And whatever you're saying I can or can't do, or I'm doing wrong, we're going to challenge your ethical system in place. And if your ethical system is a subjective system, we can break that down to, well, your opinion or preferences. So ultimately, all you'd be bringing into the conversation from your worldview is, I don't agree with certain things you're saying. I don't like certain things that you're saying. You can try to point out how they're structurally wrong, how they're invalid. But at the end of it all, I'm going to ask you why that is wrong. And you're going to have to give me a subjective case. Well, I think it's wrong personally, subjectively. In other words, it's your opinion at best.
The book of Revelation. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for now. Please feel free to comment, and please hit that like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.